Communications. All right, ready to go? Okay. Hi, everybody, and to our Thursday New Economy Week panel. It's really great to have you all with us. In just a second, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel. First of all, I just wanted to introduce myself and let Aisha introduce herself. Unfortunately, Deirdre Smith was meant to be moderating this panel and is not feeling well, and so Aisha and I are filling in. I am co-director of organizing at the New Economy Coalition.
And I'm the other co-director of organizing at NEC.
And together we will be moderating this panel. And so we have with us Kwabena and Nkromo from Atlanta Food and Farm, and newly of Boston Food and Farm, and he's going to talk a little bit more about that work. Ivy Brashear from the Mountain Association for Community Economic Development in Eastern Kentucky, and Penn Lowe, who many other titles at Tufts University, and actually has his whole class tuning in to watch this today. So we're in great company. And to kick us off, since the idea for this panel was to talk a little bit about the importance of honoring our histories in the work that we do to build a just transition and a new economy, I thought we would just ask the panelists to speak briefly on where they come from. Tell us a little bit about where they come from. And then we'll move into talking a little bit about how that brings them to the amazing work that they're doing. And so, Kwabena, would you mind getting us started?
Yes. Hey, how you doing, Aisha and Rachel and everyone else on the panel? I'm glad to be here today. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure. Apologize for the audience. I'm in a airport and maybe a little bit of background noise, so I'll try to speak up. My name again is Kwabena Nkromo. I'm the founder and lead principal of a consulting group that's a social enterprise firm called Atlanta Food and Farm. And then now we're expanding into Boston market through Boston Food and Farm, replicating the model of work that we've pioneered in Atlanta for the past 3 years. And it's essentially an effort to provide support for local food system planning efforts in the markets that we're in, and focus on developing urban agriculture projects, urban farms, gardens, and so forth, to develop a local economy based upon a concept we call civic agriculture, which is the focus on not just building production sites or other elements of the food system, but building communities and developing humans at the center of the economy, in the spirit of E.F. Schumacher and his pioneering work, Small is Beautiful, Economics is that People Matter. So out of that space is how we are members of the New Economy Coalition and part of this work. And I'm very happy to be here to participate in this conversation.
Great. And Kwabena, just as a follow-up, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about where you come from, a little bit of your personal story, and what brings you to this work.
Yeah. Happy.
And who are your people?
Yeah, who are my people? Who am I repping? Yeah. Yeah, I was born in the neighborhood called Roxbury in Boston, Massachusetts. My people are North Carolina people. Both my parents were part of the Great Migration of Southern African Americans looking for work in the North a generation or two ago. And so my folks met in the South End before I came, and made a love connection, and then brought forth 11 children. So I'm one of 11 siblings. And I grew up on 15 Huckins Street in Roxbury, and in the midst of the precursor to the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative movement of a neighborhood under attack from environmental justice issues, absentee landlords, profiteering off of arson, and all of the kinds of issues that are often in our neighborhoods in America that are African American and poor. Um, I was able to develop a sense of consciousness about the possibility of resistance, both from my family culture of being together as one, as well as the community around me. And I was honored to be a youth member of the Daily Street Neighborhood Initiative and eventually a staff member of the organization in my adult life. And I've carried those core values with me as an activist and organizer in other places. I went to college at Tuskegee University in Alabama, and eventually I live in Atlanta, Georgia now, and I'm very active as a civic leader and now a entrepreneur carrying the same core values of community building and liberation work by any means necessary for helping the neighborhoods that I belong to and the people I'm connected to be free and whole.
Great, thank you so much. Ivy, would you mind going next, telling us a little bit about where you're coming from?
Not at all.
Not at all. Sure. I have one thing that I have been told to remind all of the folks who are watching, which is that if you are interested in asking questions to our panelists, you can tweet using the hashtag New Economy Week, and we're monitoring that, and we'll be able to pick up your questions that way. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ivy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel and Aisha and everybody for being on this panel and for listening and having us here to talk about this great subject, which I'm very passionate about. So I am Ivy Brashear, and I come from a long line of Appalachian people. I am the 5th generation to live on land that was settled by my great-great-grandfather before the Civil War in eastern Kentucky. And I come from coal miners, I come from timber folk, a long line of activists. My place is sort of intertwined with coal in a way that many people who aren't from there don't understand. It's a cultural aspect of where I'm from, and it's very important to the people and to the heritage and the history, but also complex. complex. So Eastern Kentucky has a long history of fighting for better lives for ourselves, fighting for a better economy. Huge history of coal mine unions there, battles that actually took place. People were killed in these union wars fighting for a better life for themselves. So this is the place that I come from, and I think there's much to learn from that history and from our connection to this place that can be translated to other places and used to create this just economy that we all deserve. And I'm happy to be here.
Sorry, y'all. Thanks so much, Ivy. And we'll close out with Penn. You're still, can you hear me, Penn?
Yep, I'm here.
Go ahead. Yep.
Thanks a lot for having me. And this coincided perfectly with the environmental justice class that I'm teaching, and they're downstairs hopefully being able to monitor this panel. And I'll speak directly to them. You know, no hard questions for us, please. But I've been teaching at Tufts in the Urban Environmental Policy and Planning Department for the last 5 years. I came into this work after spending close to 20 years in work in environmental justice. And much of that was with an organization called Alternatives for Community and Environment, ACE, based also in Roxbury, and did a lot of work with the group that Kwabena had mentioned, Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. But I guess maybe just to go before that, I mean, how did I end up in that work? I mean, my family ended up coming here. My parents immigrated to the U.S. in the early 1960s at a time when restrictions from Asia were starting to be relaxed. and had a typical, I think, first generation born here in the U.S. upbringing, and I found out later that a lot of my childhood was well, I was basically living out what people call the model minority myth, and I did very well in school, and was good at math and science. I ended up going to school at MIT studying engineering. I naively thought that engineers brought good things to life, which was what the commercials told us. Little did I know that once I started down that path, and when I was in school, that my first job was with the Draper Laboratories here in Cambridge, that is essentially a military defense research outfit, and was literally designing missile guidance systems, which was maybe the antithesis of bringing good things to life. And that really made me deeply question, a lot of things about why I had been set up in a track to basically play this role in the military-industrial complex. And I guess, long story short, I found my way to a lot of social justice work, and was schooled by the environmental justice movement, and basically grew up with that, and have been able to be a part of that. It's been a privilege to work with groups and with frontline communities like the ones in Roxbury here in Boston. And I can say more about that kind of work when we get to the next section, I guess.
Awesome. Thanks so much, all of you, for sharing your histories and stories. It's not often that we get to talk about that. We often get right to talking about our work and not really learning about our personal motivations and histories and legacies. So it was really beautiful to hear about that from each of you. The next question that we want to pose is, what is the work that you do in the context of your organization or your connections to organizations, and how does that connect to the ideas of just transition and new economy? And I think we'll start with Ivy on that one.
Unmute myself really quick. So I work at the Mountain Association for Community Economic Development, and this is an almost 40-year-old community financial development institution. So we have a multi-layered approach to just transition, and part of that is a communications and policy effort. We try to communicate a new conversation about the economy that is possible in Eastern Kentucky and Central Appalachia through various different forms, and also we do policy research about how to make that economy a reality. But we also do demonstration programs, and these are demonstrations about sectors within sectors or on issues that we think have the highest potential to create a strong foundation for a sustainable economic future in the region. And those programs include enterprise development, in which we give small business loans to existing or beginning businesses in the region, and also provide technical assistance to these folks to help them maintain their business and keep it open. And we also do a lot of energy work. We have an on-bill financing program called House Smart Kentucky, and this program allows homeowners who are generally low to moderate income to make energy efficiency retrofits on their homes, and then pay for those retrofits with the savings that they make on their electric bill every month. And we also have a commercial energy efficiency program in which we largely help grocery stores retrofit their grocery store owners retrofit their stores to save energy and money, essentially, and it allows them to reduce the price of their product. And in much of Eastern Kentucky, there are food deserts that are serviced by these grocery stores, and if we can keep those open, that's a really great thing. We also do statewide policy, which has an impact on just transition in a lot of ways, not just in Eastern Kentucky, but statewide. And we also have a forestry program in which we do a carbon capture program with small forest landowners in eastern Kentucky. Businesses will pay the Appalachian Carbon Partnership, which is the name of it, to offset their carbon emissions, and then we will pay landowners with a portion of that to sustainably manage their forest land.
Thanks, Ivy. Ken, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your work and its connection to just transition and new economy?
Sure. Why don't I start just by saying a little bit more about the environmental justice work that I've been involved in, because that's really my pathway into just transition as well as new economy work. So the years that I spent with ACE really were about trying to build community power to defend against disproportionate environmental burdens. And as we took on that work in the 90s and into the latter 90s, we were finding that really a lot of the issues that we were fighting against were really the tail end of an economic cycle in which land had been used for industrial or other purposes and then essentially thrown away when you couldn't really profit from it anymore. And these became contaminated brownfields, these became eyesores and detractions in the community, and communities that had the people who remained, were figuring out how to take that land back and bring it into something that would be productive as part of a whole and healthy community. And as we got into the latter 90s into the 2000s, found that now that in places like Boston, where cities became more valuable again, and people wanted to invest and from abroad, and land's value started to go up, and we started to see that now it wasn't just that we were dealing with the consequences of abandoned land, but we were really in a beginning cycle of contending with, can we keep control over land and prevent it from becoming gentrified and displacing people who had been there revitalizing the neighborhood all along. And so in a way, I guess this is to say that we were understanding environmental justice as part of being produced by the economic system and the cycles that it goes through. And so as we talk about just transition, we have to keep in mind the frontline communities, which I think can be defined in many ways. I think one of the images for me that sticks out pretty clearly are what people call the fence line communities, or the communities at the mine mouth, and and these are certainly really dramatic depictions of the contradictions of here are the places where we're extracting and in a sense starting the cycle of creating some of the climate problems. But this economy that extracts and has those impacts at the fence line and in mine country also have impacts in the places as part of an economy that's about growth and throwing away. It makes expendable entire peoples and communities and places. And that's exactly what we were dealing with in Roxbury. What had once been thrown away was, now seen as valuable again, and we were fighting for control over development. And, who benefits, who pays, and who decides, I think, are the big questions that arise from the environmental justice perspective. And I think those are really the same questions that we're talking about here with the just transition. If we believe that there will necessarily be a transition towards a different economy that hopefully will allow us to sustain ourselves, then the question is, can that be a fair process? And can we treat all the communities who have been excluded from the benefits of the previous economy and who've been excluded from the decision making, how can they take the decisions and the opportunities to build the economy that they think will benefit themselves the most?
Mm-hmm. Good, thanks. Yeah, it's really interesting to consider some of those tensions, and hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Kwabena, I'm interested to hear from you how you see your work connecting with the
Yeah. Again, apologize about any background noise. Please let me know if it becomes a real problem. I'm going to try to relocate. But uh, these are big questions that are hard for me even to necessarily narrow down into an answer that does justice really to the scope of the challenge. And so I really can't really. I would like to just sort of back up and just say, my feelings about and beliefs about the new economy challenges is around the fundamental illegitimacy of our current economy and ultimately civilization because of very primal um, problematic foundations. And from my identity vantage point, in the Americas, it starts with the institution of slavery and that fundamental economic disruption of persons and the exploitation and use of people's labor without their compensation for multiple generations, and the structural inequity. And so, I mean, that continues to be the frame, no matter how sophisticated or how, intricate the each individual circumstance may be that I may enter into in terms of the professional work I'm doing. That the frame always goes back to that foundation of the illegitimacy of the current system. So, in fact, my intellectual approach is really one of the necessity of revolution, always. And it's just a question of what kind of revolution that I choose to engage in. And the wrong is so fundamental that it does deserve a violent revolution, but it's not a practical choice based upon my thinking process. The guns are bigger, the systems are bigger. And so I choose to take the same amount of resistance that I would for guerrilla warfare or anything else that may actually be the appropriate response to the current structural problems, and apply that energy to something productive and possible to do. And so what I've done is narrow that down to
Now, Kwabena, can you still hear us? All right. It seems like we lost him for the moment. So I'm gonna move on a little bit, and then when we have Kwabena back, we'll ask him to finish up and maybe move into the third question that we have. And I really want to appreciate you all for talking about your work and for the work itself, and for helping us today to draw some of those connections and to think through how all of these pieces of the puzzle fit together. And I'm hoping that maybe you all can reflect on that a little bit and talk about how your histories that you talked about right at the beginning of the hour, and also the legacy of this work in frontline communities and the histories of the frontline communities in which you've worked inform your work today, and how they can inform the larger work of just transition and building a new economy. Very small question. And you'll have a chance probably to reflect on it more than once, but I'm gonna turn it over first to Pen.
Yeah, it's not often I get asked that question or to connect those dots. Let me just start by saying I think, given the path that opened up for me, and one that I felt like I was almost tracked into, to working in the military industrial complex, is telling, because if that's the kind of economy that we have, and that's where the good jobs are, which is in producing and continuing to propagate a militarization of our society, then I think that's really, that's just another evidence of what we need to change. I think another aspect for me is just, growing up in an immigrant family and understanding that, people are coming here, and I appreciate Kwabena's, reference to the history of slavery. I mean, other folks who've come here haven't necessarily come here entirely by choice either. And I think if you look at much of the recent immigration, it's almost entirely around economic need and around people not having the opportunities back in their homelands, and so I think we need to make that connection as well, because many of our communities, environmental justice communities, are also now immigrant communities as well as communities of color. So. But I guess I'd like to maybe just talk a little bit about how moving forward, it's not just my personal history. It's really in the work that I do, it's always been part of communities and community groups, and the people who are members and leaders in those. And I find that there's just a lot of really great work happening now, and that I think having the privilege of being involved with. And I'll just mention three quick things regarding the work. So one is that our communities, environmental justice communities, aren't just complaining about being burdened by the environmental problems in society, but we're also trying to claim a seat in the forefront of a change toward a more sustainable and equitable economy. And one of the ways we've done that here in the Boston area is through the Green Justice Coalition, which was a community, labor, and environmental coalition that ACE was a part of, and I had the opportunity to spend a number of years helping to develop, and we were able to help win state policies that helped invest more resources in things like energy efficiency, but at the same time do that in a way that said we're not just increasing those opportunities for the folks who can afford it. We're also looking to develop those programs so that they actually serve the folks who need it the most in lower income, even moderate income communities. And finally, beyond that, we think that it's also about creating good jobs out of that work. So who gets to do that work? Lots of training programs have been set up for folks to get an entry point into that type of energy efficiency work, which is also a pathway into the construction trades and potentially union jobs that will be family-sustaining careers. So that's just one example. I think, though, for us and for me personally, it's more than just about fighting for a fair share of the jobs and things that are generated, kind of in the way that we think of business as usual. And so that's why, for me, it's very, very exciting that there's also an effort underway that here in Boston, there's a new worker cooperative that's organized called CERO, which is Cooperative Energy Recycling and Organics. And this was a group of underemployed, unemployed workers, Black and Latino, who came together and said, hey, we want to do the green jobs work. We believe we have a role to play in helping to solve the ecological crisis, and we want to create our own jobs. And they took advantage of the fact that in the Massachusetts we have a new regulation that's banning commercial food waste from going into the waste stream. And they said, well, we can develop a business that will be able to process and collect and do that in our own communities as well as serve others. And so it's very exciting because now they're doing it in a model that is not necessarily business as usual. They're saying we can create our own company and we can all be co-owners and we can run this business democratically. And they're in the process right now of developing a startup finance campaign through a direct public offering, which is also democratizing the financing of their work. And finally, I'll mention that one of the things that's really important to me right now is working with a lot of our community-based groups to understand that we don't necessarily just need a new economy. And I've always had an issue with the word new because it assumes that it doesn't exist or that we don't know what it's about. When in fact much of what we're calling the new economy are based in practices that, particularly in marginalized communities, people have done and cooperated just to survive for centuries now. And one of the things that's really inspiring to me is one of the programs at ACE is starting to shift the idea of what it means to actually do economic activity. Does it mean you have to, does economy only mean trying to get a wage-paying job and making sure that that's a good job? Or are there other ways and other systems that are already in place right now that we can build on to help meet our material needs? And so the youth at ACE started a Grow or Die campaign a few years ago. They recognized that their neighborhood lacked access to fresh vegetables, and they also noticed plenty of vacant lots and land lying around, oftentimes city-owned, and it was just laying vacant, sometimes 40-plus years, sitting around. And they said, we can just go ahead and go reclaim it. We don't have to ask for permission. We will put it back into use, build gardens on them, work with families around them to develop now a new asset for the community that will help the folks actually produce for themselves. And this is not about trying to get a good job, which is still important, but not the only way that we do economy.
Great. Thanks so much, Pen. So Kwabena, we lost you for a second. I want to circle back around to you and let you finish the thought that you got cut off on. Also let you know that we have moved into this question about what is the importance of our own histories and the history of our place in the context of building a just transition.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, I didn't hear the latter part of the new question, but I'll ask again when I get to it. I'm not sure where I got cut off. The technology is powerful, but it does have failures. I think I don't know if it was my internet connection or what have you. But essentially, what I was trying to get to was that we do things with the work that I'm doing. First of all, is not singular. All the work that I do is built with real collaboration, both inside the firm. I'm not an individual. I'm a member of a team that is in Atlanta Food and Farm and Boston Food and Farm. We're a collection of folks who are sharing our skills and resources with one another. And then secondly, almost all the projects we do are community projects that reflect the joint efforts of many people, and so not myself. So anything that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of has been collective. But the frame I was trying to create was one of urgency and intensity of the work, even as we use sort of tools that on any particular day may not feel urgent. And so the food that we do is food. That's food security work. The work that we do is food security work, trying to address the most basic needs of humans, to try to begin to redesign civilization to compensate for those fundamental flaws that I was talking about in the sort of run up to this full response. And that work is it has to take certain kind of risk and certain kinds of not really willing to tolerate certain kinds of delays and games, for lack of a better term, that are often played in, whether or not we are becoming the raw materials for other people's jobs and other people's careers and other people's industries, even in the nonprofit sector, even in the movement sector, that our stories, our conditions are almost necessary to be preserved as they are in order for other people to have something to work on. The persistence of our conditions, despite the generations of programs and efforts from the federal level on down, are at the core often that there's an industry built around poverty. There's an industry built around the lowest in the society remaining there, and even to be objectified as such, so other folks can feel good about having worked on it. And the work that we try to do is trying to break out of that box and take full responsibility for ourselves about our futures without a lot of permission about what we do and how we go about it. And so in Atlanta, we've been able to take other concepts of local food economy development and bring it into our belly as a community. and inform them as we see fit, based upon our own culture, our own pacing, and not necessarily on the timeline and deliverable of funders or academics or anybody else that has an opinion about what we need to do in our own communities. It's a position of sovereignty, that we both, for our bodies, for our families, our homes, our churches, our schools, and then ultimately our neighborhoods. You know, we're going to do whatever is necessary to be free, whole, and secure. And we're starting with the most basic human need, which is food. And I don't know if that's a really good way of answering the question, but I just want to make sure that folks understand that that's the context in which we do any particular innovation or thing that, the cutting edge model. We're doing a lot of stuff that, I can flash out as being very sophisticated and I'm very proud of. But what's most important to me is people understand how essential it is to be urgent, to be authentic, and to be true to yourself in the work.
Great. That's a beautiful segue into, and I'll repeat so that you can hear it. The last question. I wonder if you could just talk for a minute or two on this question as well, which is just sort of connecting the first question that I asked and the question that Aisha asked. So what is the importance of grounding ourselves and remaining connected to our personal history and the history of our place in the context of doing this work of just transition, of food security, of new economy?
It's essential because the nature of the matrix, the system that we're up against, is so all-encompassing and all-powerful, but also so weak on one hand. So it's both powerful, it's both challenging, but it's also weak because it doesn't have complete legitimacy of being rooted in authentic self. And so we need to know who we are at all times, both in terms of to withstand the challenges of what we're up against, but also to be able to muster the real, actually superior strength of coming from a space of our hearts and our identities, because that's far more powerful than a profit motive, which is based on very abstract concepts, oftentimes that cannot. We see the weaknesses of the system, the financial crises, the environmental implosions. These are all signs of a poorly designed civilization, and one that comes out of human culture, one that comes out of the authenticity of real, solid, sort of sustainable networks. These things can actually have lasted the test of time. Malcolm X famously said, history is best able to reward all research. If we don't know our own history, we can't even understand the situation we find ourselves in now. So it's very important, both strategically and holistically, to know who we are at every moment, in every meeting, in every grant proposal, in every report. It ought to come from who you are, so that you don't get caught up in somebody else's construct.
If you could just mute yourself in between, and I'm going to turn it over to Ivy. And I just want to remind folks who are watching, we're about to move into a portion where we'd love to have some questions from you. And so if you could tweet with the hashtag New Economy Week, if you can tweet your questions, then we'll make sure to ask them. And then also, if you don't have a Twitter account, you can email eli@neweconomy.net. That's eli@neweconomy.net. And I'm going to turn it over to Ivy to speak a little bit to this last question.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I come from a place that has largely been forgotten by the systems that be. We have been exploited for decades, for generations. Things have been taken from us, and we have not received much for that take. So we also come from a rich history of, like I was saying at the start of the hour, organizing, a rich history of organizing, a rich history of unions and activism and fighting for our place and who we are. This is a part of who we are as much as coal mining is a part of who we are. And so in this transition, since we have been largely ignored, since folks don't necessarily the folks in power, the powers that be, don't necessarily see the value of our place, but we do. We have had to harken back to our past and to this very essential part of who we are as a people, of community and of collaboration. We have had to draw on that to sort of start the wheels turning and create a foundation of the economy that we want in the region. And this is happening in lots of different ways. It's manifesting in many different ways. In specific communities like Wattsburg, Kentucky, where there's now a worker-owned record store. There are local businesses cropping up all the time where people come and they gather and they meet and they talk. And this is important for community building and some coal mining communities that have been very much divided by the coal industry on purpose as a way to maintain control over these communities. So having spaces where we can come together and we can talk about the change we want and how we get there and what we want to see in our communities, just what we want them to look like, is very crucial. It's very important. But there are also other movements that are happening. We're trying to, as a people, rely on the many assets that we have in Appalachia, that we have within ourselves as people and within our communities. We're using those assets to design sectors and to design jobs and work that matters, work that not only feeds our families and puts food on our table, but also feeds our souls and makes us feel like we are people. We're not just cogs in the wheel. And so these assets that we're relying on are really helping to drive this transition forward. And these are assets that have been around since people have been in this region. It really is moving forward. We really are trying to connect to our place and what makes our place unique and what makes it special and different than any other place. And we're connecting to that sort of power that is coming from the place itself and from the history and from the people to drive our economy forward. That's really what this whole transition that Appalachia is currently sitting in, that's what it's all about, really.
Great. Can I ask a quick follow-up, which is just to talk a little bit briefly about your work with youth and your fellow young people in Appalachia, just briefly before we move on.
Sure, yeah. So a few years ago, a lot of young people, probably mid to early 20s, decided that we weren't really hearing from our local leaders and we weren't hearing from the powers that be things that we wanted to hear about how we were going to advance the economy and start a new day in the region that we saw coming, I think, long before those powers that be would admit that they saw it. So a group called Stay Together Appalachian Youth was formed, and this is a group that brings together youth from ages 14 to 30, youth and young people from Central Appalachia, and that's from 5 different states, the regions of 5 different states that make up Central Appalachia, and brings these people together for yearly conferences, gatherings, and we come together and we talk about issues that we think are important to the region and that we think need to be addressed that aren't being addressed by local leaders, by state leaders, that we feel something needs to be done about in order to have that just economy that we want, that we're working toward. And so the most recent issues that we've taken on is education justice, juvenile justice, and how that really affects the region, and also clean water. It's tell a brief little anecdote. I was in San Francisco recently in the Bay Area and with another friend of mine from the region, and we were trying to find some water to drink in this place that we were told we could drink out of the tap, and that's something that we just don't. We're not able to do that in Eastern Kentucky. We can't turn on the tap and drink that water. So that's a really big important issue for young people. They want to have clean water to drink for their families to drink. But yeah, the Stay Project is it's a really interesting thing, and it's growing every year, and we're doing what we can.
Great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
There were so many really interesting and beautiful gems coming from all of you, and we actually have a few more questions and some coming up on our Twitter feed. And one of the questions that we see connects to that last question about youth and young people, and I think we heard some themes from all of you talking about the role of young people in taking various aspects of new economy and just transition into their hands, and thinking about young people actually as one of the frontline communities. If we sort of expand our definition of frontline community and think about young people as people who are certainly most impacted and not necessarily the ones traditionally making the decisions. And so the question from our Twitter feed is, what is the role of, it says universities, but I want to expand that to what is the role of universities and other institutions that exist to support the development of young people in supporting activism within a just transition.
Anybody can take these questions. I don't think Penn is on mute. Is that because you have something to say? Go ahead, Penn.
Oh, you're asking me to take a shot at
yeah,
the answer?
Sure. I saw you take your mute button off, and I know you know absolutely nothing about universities and their role.
I've said this to a lot of people. I have a love-hate relationship with universities, and I happen to be working for one now. Love because I think young people have been had a little less time to become as jaded or cynical, and so the passion, the energy, the real outrage at the fact that they don't want to live in this kind of world and want to do something to change it is amazing. And I think universities, at least like this one, in some ways try to help support that. And I know through our program, I think we can create some of those free spaces where people can talk frankly about how they're thinking about and seeing what the possibilities are, but also what the real challenges are, and developing their own lenses. And I think one of the things that's really important, which Kwabena, you pointed to throughout, is the importance of understanding history and understanding differences in histories between different peoples and in different places. We sometimes get, and this is, I think, why sometimes I hate universities, because universities are also places that so-called produce knowledge that becomes then the knowledge, which counts somehow more than the knowledge of everyone else. And that dominant knowledge can oftentimes be put in the service of folks who hold power and resources now. So I think there is a fight within universities that we need to take on too, which is to legitimize and really showcase the knowledge that we have in communities, particularly ones that have been excluded, marginalized, and oppressed.
Go ahead.
So, this is Kwabena. Can y'all hear me? Hello?
Yep, I gotcha.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you broadening the question to sort of institutions in general that deal with young people. From foundational level, a lot of the actual urban agriculture design work we do for projects are focused on schools, grade schools. Beyond the sort of platitudes of the youth are our future, it is a strategic move to expose as young as possible people to a different way of seeing themselves and the world around their economic well-being and their gastric-centered citizenship, as we like to talk about. We're conditioned in the current educational system to view ourselves as workers to service a system that presumes that you'll fit into a cog in this machine, but it doesn't. It's not natural. It's not. It's not born of out of our natural needs. And so to get young people, and with the projects we do at schools, particularly really well designed ones like edible schoolyards, where their academic pursuits are lived out in a natural space, and that they have a visceral experience with nature and the ecology, and they're putting things in their mouths that they were involved in producing. It creates a basic shift in their consciousness that whether or not they go on to become urban farmers or long-term local food system participants, they're going to look at something completely different for the rest of their lives when they go into grocery stores, or when their families do their budgets, or when they may become in some kind of policy position later on, where they're going to have a different perspective than someone who really does think their relationship with food is done through Walmart or Kroger's or Safeway, and not the land itself. And so we put a lot of energy into those projects, but at the university level, it's been a very powerful tool to work with schools in our area, Emory University, Georgia Tech, Georgia State University, and then the Black colleges at the Atlanta University Center, to do participatory action research with communities, with neighborhoods who are trying to wrestle with these tools of food systems planning, and to not be dependent upon foundations and others only for that data, that they need to own themselves about their own stories. That the food desert phenomena in our world is used again constantly by others to justify resources that they end up using to employ themselves. And the neighborhoods have to own that data. And transference between the student interns and the volunteers in the community to work with neighborhoods on an equal basis can be a very powerful combination when it's done right. And I think Penn, alluded to, the good side of the university partnerships that we try to model and accentuate.
Great. Abby, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, just briefly. So in Appalachia, it's essential that our young people at university level and younger are told that the place is worth it. For so many years, they have been told that it's not worth it, that they have to leave to find success and happiness and jobs. So for our institutions that are working with young people, for our elementary schools, our high schools, it's essential that they take on the vision of a brighter future for Appalachia, and they instill that into these young people so that they know it's worth it. And so if they so choose, they can stay and they can make it worth it. So it's essential. Like their work with youth is essential.
Thank you. We have quite a few more questions now, and the next question, based on our Twitter feed, sort of relates to something you said earlier, Kwabena, about alluding to new economy work, just transition work as revolutionary. Practice and put the economy in that context, then we're talking about completely shifting a system in which state and corporate power continues to sort of oppress and create some of the crises that we see. And so the question is for any of you that wish to answer is, how do you see, or how have you seen the just transition work sort of provoking resistance or repression from state and from corporate power? And how have you seen the community then resisting that oppression?
Yeah, I mean, my experience has been the underbelly of the nonprofit sector as an extension of corporate power. There's this sort of perception that nonprofit, the world of the industry is not connected to the rest of the capitalist system. When in fact it is, just like the church is. These are institutions all work in some kind of interconnected way to manage expectations or to manage discontent. in a society. And so, in the nonprofit world, you can look at it as a vent for, to the frustration of communities. The perception that these organizations and the funders are here to help, and they're not extensions of capital that was stolen at some point or accumulated in an unjust way from coal miners in Appalachia or from former plantations. Aggregated capital kept at a privileged level, and then it's eked out into grants, to make us feel like there's been something good happening. That has been the resistance. The pushback I've seen is foundations who manipulate, and pit organizations against each other for funding purposes, or they create deliverable concepts like food deserts that have us all thinking in a very narrow way about how to resolve our problems, or even to take advantage of our opportunities. And it's insidious because we don't see it for that, and sometimes we don't bring a critical lens to it to participate in it because we have to. And that is where the capital often is, but you don't have to give your soul over to it. You don't have to believe lock, stock, and barrel about the construct that you're having to do to get a particular resource, that you can enter into that world and exit to it and still remain yourself as a person and as a community. That's where I've seen the pushback comes, when they force us to shift every year to a new hot thing that will allow us to get a grant, as opposed to us staying true to our own value-based perspective about what our solution is that may take multiple generations to get to. And we can't ebb and flow with the fads of foundations. We have to stay, we have to force the foundations to support what we decide are the priorities. And I've seen that manipulation happen either unintentionally or intentionally, but most oftentimes I believe it's intentional as a reflection of keeping communities off-centered from being too hot about their situations.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Anybody? All right. We've got time. Those of you who are watching, thanks for sending your questions. We have time for a couple more. Did you have another one you wanted to ask? We do have an emailed one.
Oh.
So I'm going to paraphrase a question that we just got emailed, and thanks to the person who emailed this. And basically, the question is, if we're all still imprisoned by the existing system, isn't it too early to be building the world that we want? And that connects to a question that somebody else asked, which is sort of how do we engage with the kind of work that you're talking about, right? So somebody asked us, how do we get involved with the kind of work that you're talking about? But I want to start with that first question. Isn't it too early? Are we jumping the gun by talking about building this world that we want right now? And Ivy, I see you unmuted.
It's actually too late. We should have been having these conversations and been talking about this new economy years ago. It's never too early. It's most often too late. And also, like, if we don't start the conversation now, if we're not talking about this now, even while these oppressive systems still exist, when are we going to talk about it? When do we start that conversation? When do we start moving on these issues and trying to change these systems? There's just, timing is relative, and to me, it's too late. To me, it should have started years ago. And the second question, could you repeat that? Because I felt like I had an answer to that too.
The second question is how do we, whoever tweeted that question, whoever tweeted that question was asking, how do we get involved in this kind of work? What can we do?
I think it's about, for me, I think about the local first. I think about what folks can do on a local level, because to me that seems the easiest entry point for folks to get involved in any sort of social change that's happening. I guess I would just say look locally, look at your local community, and look at how you can shift conversations or start conversations that are happening in that community about economy and jobs and climate change and how it all works together, and how we can talk about more just ways of doing these things, and that sort of leads to changing those systems that are so oppressive. I mean, that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing in Eastern Kentucky, and we're seeing it work in the most amazing ways. It's incredible.
Great, thank you. Pen, I think you unmuted yourself. Yeah. Do you wanna take that one?
Yeah, I did unmute myself, and I just want to say I totally agree with Ivy. But this also, I think, goes back to something that we actually were just talking about in my class, which is, do we, is our conception of systems change kind of a single moment where we have revolution, so that we can say one day after revolution we're going to have, somehow the society that we want, the economy that we want. And I would say, we need to look at history. Capitalism didn't create itself overnight through a revolution either. I mean, there were multiple events, lots of struggle, and a lot of that had to do with the struggle over how we think and what we want to see happen. And so I think we're in a time right now where, a big part of what we have to do is just unshackle our own minds about what we think is possible. I mean, I think we all want to see a just, sustainable, democratic economy, which is, I think, the moniker for a new economy. But in a lot of ways, we don't really believe it, or we don't have enough daily experience of actually seeing it in action. And I think that's what we have to figure out what to do. And those are things we can do something about, starting with, everything that we're involved in, locally, whether that's, something that is at your workplace, in your community, in whatever, school or institution you're at. There are ways to develop, democratic, cooperative action, and getting people to figure out how to do things together that, that are for a broader good. And, and having those things contribute to very large kind of global problems like climate. I mean, how else are we going to start? So I would just echo Ivy saying, we've got to continuously be doing these things. And it's not like we haven't. I mean, these things have persisted, and people have kept the flames alive about, ways that we could be doing things differently.
Yeah, I agree with Penn. I mean, this is not it's not a destination. It's a process. It's a journey, and we do have to realize. I think it's a little bit dangerous actually to sort of have this idea that something has to happen before we are on our way. That is sort of part of the matrix. That's part of the matrix to believe that that we have to wait. We are. It is a perception issue, and then one of the victories of oppression is to people to wait to be happy, people to wait to enjoy life. Even in the midst of the most difficult conditions, we can still laugh, we can still play music, we can still love, and this is our most important sign of resistance, is that we are still human, that we are still claim the right to be all that is part of our inheritance as human beings. And so when we build from there, it'll always be real, it'll always be sustainable, because that can't be taken away. Only if we allow it, if we accept that our lives have no meaning because we don't have a certain amount of numbers in our bank account, or we don't control certain amounts of industry. What's most important is that what we have is ours, and that we know it. As A.F. Schumacher taught us, that it's at the scale that a human can perceive it, understand it, control it, have influence on it. This is our guiding light that we design for scale, that we design for ownership for those that are impacted by the systems. And if we keep that, if we hew to that, we can keep righteousness at the core. And, we can keep ourselves from becoming our own oppressors as we we search for solutions that become circular, because we get caught up into the margins and not the core of the heart of what the matter is. And so With the work that we're doing, I feel like I've robbed this webinar a little bit because I did not talk a lot about the technical, the very specific nature of the work. I've kept it more about the spirit of it. But the work that we're doing is about the commons. The commons. If I was to leave something to the person that was asking about where to start, look to the commons. Look to the one way in which we can sort of exponentially catch up, exponentially rectify. We have to go back to certain resources that belong to all of us and reclaim them for all of us. It's the privatization of things that belong to all mankind is at the root of capitalism, and that's the injustice, that's the wrong, that's the evil. Not the methodologies of corporations, because a lot of them are good, a lot of them are efficient, a lot of them are good ways to produce things. It's the basic position that one small segment of our civilization, of our population, can have the fruits of those resources, and not the rest of us. That the rest of us have to be peons. The rest of us, have to be, somebody has to do without for others to have. That's the problem. And so the more we lift up the commons, and everywhere we can, with the internet, with the library, with the radio waves, with our water, if we can keep to that, then the outputs of that will be more balanced, more equitable, and we mix in culture, and then we all are honored, and we're not marginalized. And I think those are the seeds of hope. That's what I get up every day and put my back towards, my shoulder towards, and I have faith that if I do that, in the now and in the future, that I've won. So that's what I do.
Thank you so much, all of you. I think we have time for one last question. I'm going to ask if Aisha wants to pull one last question, either out of her mind or off of the Twitter feed, and then we'll be done.
Yeah, so we do have a good one on the Twitter feed, and it points to a point that Penn made earlier about the tension between sort of creating sustainable or green economy and then who has ownership and who has decision-making power over that economy. And so the question is, how do we negotiate the tension between the urgency that is related to climate justice, for example, climate and racial and economic justice, and then the intentionality and the long-term nature of what it really takes to achieve a just transition.
And these are closing words, folks. Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I think urgency sometimes gets interpreted falsely, that we have to find a shortcut. Mm-hmm. And to me, the amount of time we've spent trying to find shortcuts has now added up to a pretty long time. I mean, if we just look at the climate stuff and look at how long it's been since Kyoto, we're talking about almost a generation now. And if we're still looking to establish that same solution, what if we had spent all that time building up, more powerful local actions that that don't necessarily need a unified or over global regulatory process? If we were able to connect people up together and build up an ethical economy that was supportive of each other across place. These are different ways of thinking about scaling up. But at the end of the day, all of this has to start with real people in real places trying to make the best decisions they can about how they can best work together, right, to solve problems, to care for each other and for the planet. So to me, it's always I guess what they say, you can't get a really long way unless you start taking the first steps. Mm-hmm. And we just got to keep marching.
Thank you. Ivy, you want to give us some parting words?
Yeah, sure. I'm stuck on that. We got to keep marching because I feel like that's how this work happens. It is urgent. Things are happening and people are dying and hurting and suffering and things need to be done. But you throw one stone into the pond and it makes a ripple, and those ripples go out and they go out and they go out and they go out, and that's sort of the nature of this work. At least from my perspective, you have to keep marching. You have to keep put in front of the other. Call on your history, call on your past, call on the assets of your place, and use those to your benefit. And keep that hope alive, because as Kwabena said, we are still human, and that's what matters. I would just second that thought of, it's all about one foot in front of the other, small steps, and those small steps add up eventually.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again for allowing me to be on this conversation. I can't wait to a moment to meet my fellow panelists in person and continue these conversations, heart to heart. The connections between us across geography, across culture, across particular situations are essential and necessary. So thank you for the New Economy Coalition for making this possible. It really is about the things that Ivy was talking about. Look around you. Just start where you are. There's a colleague of mine here in Atlanta, Eugene Cook, who's the most incredible urban farmer I've ever known. Can grow things out of the air, it seems. And he says, just grow where you are. Now that's for food production, but you can apply that to any area of work. Just start where you are. Booker T. Washington, the founder of Tuskegee University, had an allegory about, drop your buckets where they are. We all have something. We all have something. We're asset-based community development. We all have something to build from. Do not imagine that there's something out there that you have to get before you can get started. If you have air to breathe, you are adequate. If you have arms and legs, you are adequate. If you have a brain, you're adequate. You're adequate. Your community's adequate for all that you need. Start where you are, and think about your work as art. Think about it as beauty. Something that is calling upon your natural gifts, your own imagination. Don't allow yourself to be narrow to your rational thinking. Bring your whole self to the problem. Bring your whole self to the opportunity. And just out of the actual science of how we are built, the right thing will come out of you. I guarantee you that. In my 43 years, I've learned that if you just stay true to those basics, that whether it's a dissertation quality result of work or not, it is going to be most useful when it's true to who you are.
Thank you so much. Well, so that's the end of our time together, and I just want to send out some deep love and appreciation to our panelists and to the folks who were watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you will all continue the conversation with us. We've got a few more great New Economy Week events left. And you can check those out at neweconomyweek.org. And it's been great to spend this time with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been deeply inspiring, and you've given us so much to think about. We'll see you all soon. And safe travels, Kwabena.
Yeah, thanks. I'll see everybody in Detroit.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.